The private jet was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic when the billionaire's 6-month-old daughter screamed like the world was ending. Then a broke 10-year-old black kid from Coach stood up and whispered, "She just wants her daddy to hold her the right way." If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. The private jet was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic when the billionaire's 6-month-old daughter screamed like the world was ending. Then a broke 10-year-old black kid from Coach stood up and whispered, "She just wants her daddy to hold her the right way." Alexander Voss sat alone in the forward cabin of his Gulfstream G700, the one place on Earth where money could still buy silence. Tonight it had failed him. His daughter, Amara, was 6 months old and had been crying for 43 straight minutes. Not the cute, hiccuping whimper of a tired baby, this was raw, guttural, the kind of sound that scraped the inside of your skull. Her tiny face was crimson, fists balled so tight the veins stood out like blue threads. The two nannies he paid more than most CEOs had tried everything. Warmed bottle, pacifier, white noise machine, swaddling, rocking, singing. Nothing worked. One nanny was crying quietly in the galley now, mascara streaked, defeated. Alexander hadn't touched Amara in 12 days. He told himself it was because he was busy closing the Zurich acquisition. He told himself it was because the nannies were trained professionals. He told himself a lot of things. The truth was simpler and uglier. Every time he looked at her, he saw the wife who had died bringing her into the world. Camille's eyes. Camille's mouth. Camille's absence. Holding Amara felt like holding a live grenade made of grief. So he sat in his cream leather chair, laptop open to numbers that no longer mattered, pretending he couldn't hear the screaming. His jaw was clenched so hard it ached. The flight attendant kept refilling his whiskey even though he hadn't asked. He hated the taste tonight. He hated everything tonight. Back in Coach, 30 rows and 1 world away, 10-year-old Jamal Carter pressed his forehead against the cold window and tried to disappear. His grandmother, Miss Lorraine, slept beside him with her mouth open, snoring softly through the congestion that never quite left her lungs since the mold in their old apartment. They were flying to New York because the doctors at Emory had finally said the words no one wanted to hear. "We've done all we can hear." Jamal knew what that meant even if the adults spelled it out in whispers. He was small for his age, all elbows and knees, wearing the same Spider-Man hoodie he'd had since 3rd grade because it still fit if he didn't breathe too deep. The crying from the front of the plane drifted back like smoke under a door. Every passenger felt it. Some glared. Some put on headphones. Jamal just listened. He knew that cry. He'd heard it the night his mama didn't come home from the hospital after the car accident. He'd made the same sound for weeks, curled up under the kitchen table so his grandma wouldn't see. He unbuckled his seatbelt before he could talk himself out of it. "Jamal, baby, where you going?" Miss Lorraine mumbled, half awake. "I'll be right back, Grandma. Promise." He walked the long aisle like he belonged there, past the curtain that separated the haves from the have-nots. A flight attendant started to stop him, saw something in his face and let him pass. Alexander didn't notice the boy until he was standing right beside the bassinet. Jamal was barefoot. He'd kicked off his worn-out sneakers under the seat. His socks had holes at both big toes. He looked at Amara, then at Alexander, then back at the baby. "She hurt?" he asked quietly. Alexander blinked, dragged out of whatever dark math he'd been doing in his head. "What? Is she hurt?" "My little cousin cried like that when she had an ear infection." "She's teething," Alexander said, the lie automatic. The pediatrician said. Jamal shook his head like he was 50 years older than 10. "Nah, she ain't teething. She lonely." Alexander almost laughed, an ugly, reflexive thing. "She has 2 nannies." Hum. Jamal studied the baby the way mechanics study engines. "When's the last time you held her?" The question hit like a slap. Alexander opened his mouth, closed it. The nanny in the galley was pretending not to listen. Jamal didn't wait for an answer. He reached into the bassinet with the confidence of someone who had soothed more babies than most adults ever would. His hands were small, calloused from helping his grandma carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs. He slid one hand under Amara's back, the other under her neck, and lifted her the way his auntie had taught him. Firm but gentle, like you're holding somebody's whole heart in your palms. Amara's cry hitched. "What? Twice?" Jamal settled her against his narrow chest, her head tucked under his chin. He started swaying, barely moving, just a rhythm older than words. Then he began to hum, low, rough, the lullaby his mama used to sing when thunderstorms scared him. Not the polished version from YouTube, the real one off-key in places, full of cracks and Atlanta summer nights. The crying stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had pressed mute on the world. Alexander stared. The nanny stared. The flight attendant forgot the drink cart. Jamal kept humming, eyes half closed, rubbing slow circles between Amara's shoulder blades. After a minute he looked up at Alexander, not defiant, not proud, just matter of fact. She just wanted her daddy to hold her the right way, he said again, softer this time. That's all. Then he carefully placed Amara in Alexander's frozen arms. The baby rooted against his dress shirt, gave one sleepy sigh and went limp with trust. Alexander's hands shook so badly he was terrified he'd drop her. But he didn't. He couldn't. Something in his chest cracked open like ice on a winter pond, and for the first time in 6 months he felt the full, impossible weight of the tiny person who was now his entire family. Jamal stepped back, wiped his hands on his hoodie and met Alexander's eyes. You good now? The boy asked. Alexander couldn't speak. He managed a nod. Jamal smiled, small and tired. Cool. I'ma go sit down before they kick me out. He turned to walk away. Alexander found his voice. Wait, what's your name? Jamal, the boy said over his shoulder. Jamal Carter. And just like that, two worlds that should never have touched collided at 30,000 feet, and neither of them would ever be the same. Alexander Voss stood in the narrow galley aisle holding his daughter for the first time since the funeral, and the plane felt too small for the size of what was happening inside his ribcage. Amara's weight was nothing and everything. Her damp cheek pressed against his collar, tiny fingers curled into the fabric of his $5,000 shirt like it was the only safe place left on earth. Her breathing had already gone slow, and even the way it does when a baby finally believes the world isn't going to disappear. Jamal was 3 steps away, almost back to the curtain, when Alexander's voice cracked through the hush. Jamal. The boy stopped, turned. Alexander swallowed hard enough that the sound was audible. Thank you. Jamal shrugged, but his eyes flicked to Amara, soft. She good now. That's all. Alexander looked down at the baby, at Camille's mouth, Camille's lashes, and felt the tears come hot and sudden. He didn't bother hiding them. One slipped off his jaw and landed on Amara's forehead. She scrunched her nose, sighed and slept deeper. The older nanny, Marisol, appeared at his elbow with a fresh blanket, eyes red from her own crying. Sir, maybe you should sit. Not yet, he rasped. He couldn't move. If he moved, the moment might break and he'd have to go back to being the man who paid people to hold his child so he wouldn't have to feel this. Jamal shifted his weight, unsure. I should probably. Come here, Alexander said. It wasn't a command, it was closer to pleading. Please. Jamal hesitated, then walked a few steps back. Up close, Alexander could see the exhaustion in the boy's face, the faint bruise-colored shadows under his eyes, the way his hoodie was washed so many times the Spider-Man logo had cracked into white spiderwebs. Alexander lowered himself slowly into the wide leather seat, still cradling Amara like she was made of glass. He patted the ottoman across from him. Seat. Jamal perched on the very edge, hands clasped between his knees, ready to bolt. Alexander's voice came out rough. How did you know what she needed? Jamal glanced at the sleeping baby, then away like it hurt to look too long. My mama used to say babies don't cry for no reason. They cry, 'cause they trying to tell you something, with the only voice they got. Grown-ups just forgot how to listen. Alexander felt the words land like stones in still water. Ripples everywhere. Your mama sounds wise, he managed. Jamal's mouth twisted, something ancient passing over his young face. She was. Alexander's heart stuttered. He understood that verb tense better than anything else tonight. Silence stretched, thick with engine hum and the soft whistle of Amara's breathing. Finally Alexander asked the question burning a hole through him. Why did you come up here? Nobody else did. Jamal picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. Back home, when my little cousins cry and the grown-ups too tired or mad to help, I just do it. Ain't nobody else gonna. He lifted one shoulder. Plus her cry sounded like mine did when I was little and scared. Figured maybe she was scared too. Alexander stared at him. This child, this barefoot, broke 10-year-old child, was teaching him how to be a father in the space between heartbeats. He shifted Amara higher against his chest and extended his free hand. Alexander Voss. Jamal looked at the hand like it might bite him, then placed his smaller one inside it. His palm was warm, dry, strong from carrying too much too soon. Jamal Carter, he repeated, polite as Sunday school. Alexander didn't let go right away. Jamal Carter, you just saved my life. Jamal's eyes widened. I just rocked a baby, mister? No, Alexander whispered. You gave me my daughter back. The boy didn't know what to do with that. He pulled his hand away gently and tucked it under his thigh. From the galley, the younger nanny appeared with a silver tray, warm milk, cookies shaped like stars, a small bowl of fruit. She set it on the table between them without a word and vanished again. Jamal's stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead. Alexander almost smiled. Eat. I'm good. Please. Jamal took one cookie, then another when Alexander didn't look away. He ate like someone who wasn't sure when the next meal was coming, quick and quiet. Alexander watched him and felt something tectonic shift inside his chest. Shame, awe, gratitude, grief, all of it colliding until he couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. He cleared his throat. Where are you headed in New York? Jamal wiped crumbs on his jeans. Hospital. Memorial Sloan Kettering. My grandma got cancer. Doctors in Atlanta ran out of tricks. The air left Alexander's lungs in a slow leak. Jamal kept talking, voice flat like he was reading a grocery list so it wouldn't hurt. Insurance stopped paying last year. Church took up collections, sold plates, all that. Got us this far. After this, I don't know. Alexander looked at the curtain separating them from the rest of the plane, then at the boy demolishing star-shaped cookies like they were the last food on Earth, then at his daughter asleep on his chest for the first time in half a year. Something irrevocable settled in his bones. He pressed the call button. The flight attendant appeared instantly. Turn us around, Alexander said. Sir? We're going back to New York. LaGuardia, Teterboro, wherever's fastest. And clear my schedule for the next month. The attendant blinked twice, recovered her professionalism. Yes, Mr. Voss. Jamal's head snapped up. Wait, what? We can't. Alexander looked at him, eyes shining with tears he no longer cared about hiding. Jamal Carter, you just changed my entire life in 5 minutes. The least I can do is try to change yours. Jamal opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Alexander leaned forward, Amara still secure against him, and spoke so softly only the boy could hear. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, he said. But tonight you're not going back there alone. Neither of you are. And 30,000 feet above the black Atlantic, two broken worlds locked together with a sound too small for words and too big for silence. The Gulf Stream banked hard over Long Island, beginning its descent into Teterboro. The sudden tilt woke Miss Lorraine in coach. She sat up, confused, clutching her rosary like a lifeline. Jamal, baby, why we tennin' around? Jamal sat beside her now, knees bouncing, eyes wide. He had been escorted back the moment Alexander disappeared behind the privacy door to make calls. The cookies still sat warm in his stomach, but they felt wrong now, like stolen treasure. Mr. Alexander say he gonna help us, Grandma? Miss Lorraine's face folded into 100 careful lines. Rich white men don't help folks like us, baby. They feel bad for 5 minutes, then they forget. Jamal wanted to argue, but the words stuck. He had seen the way the nannies looked at him, like he was a stray dog that wandered into the wrong yard. Up front, Alexander stood in the bedroom suite, Amara finally in her crib after 2 hours of being rocked against his heartbeat. He stared at his own reflection in the dark window. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled and damp with baby drool. He looked like a man who had been cracked open and hastily glued back together. His phone buzzed on the bed. 27 missed calls. His CFO. His board. His lawyer. The Zurich team waiting for a signature that would add another billion to the pile he already couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes. He ignored them all and dialed Dr. Rachel Okonkwo, head of pediatric oncology at Memorial Sloan Kettering, a woman who owed him a favor the size of Manhattan. She picked up on the first ring. Alexander? It's 2 a.m. I need the impossible, he said without greeting. Lorraine Carter and her grandson Jamal, arriving Teterboro in 40 minutes. Stage 4 lung, failed 2 trials already. I want her in the CAR-T protocol that's still locked behind compassionate use red tape. Make it happen. A long silence. Alexander, that trial is full. FDA. Move heaven and earth, Rachel. Whatever it costs. Whatever strings. I'm texting you my new assistant's number. She'll handle money, lawyers, whatever you need. Another pause. This because of the boy on the plane everyone's whispering about? Yes, he said simply. Rachel exhaled. I'll try. But Alexander, people will talk. This looks. Let them talk. He hung up before she could warn him again. Marisol, the older nanny, appeared in the doorway. Sir, the boy's grandmother is upset. She thinks we're kidnapping them. Alexander closed his eyes. Of course she did. He walked back to the main cabin himself. The curtain parted like a stage. Miss Lorraine stood in the aisle, frail but fierce, one hand on Jamal's shoulder like she would fight the entire jet with her bare hands if she had to. "Mr. Voss," she said, voice trembling but steady, "I thank you for whatever kindness you showed my grandson. But we getting off this plane and we go into the hospital like we planned. We don't take charity from strangers." Alexander felt every eye on the plane. The handful of coach passengers who had figured out something wild was happening. His own staff, unsure whose side to stand on. He actually knelt, on the carpeted aisle so he was eye level with her. "Miss Lorraine," he said softly, "I lost my wife bringing Amara into this world. I spent 6 months paying people to keep my daughter away from my arms because I was terrified of feeling anything. Your grandson walked 20 rows, barefoot, and handed me my little girl back. He didn't ask for anything. I'm asking now." Miss Lorraine's lips pressed into a thin line. Tears stood in her eyes but pride held them back. "I know what it looks like," Alexander continued. "Rich man playing savior. I don't care. I'm not doing this for good optics or tax write-offs. I'm doing it because that boy deserves a world where grandmas don't die when there's still a chance. And because I finally learned how to hold my own child tonight, and I will spend whatever I have to pay that lesson forward." Jamal looked up at his grandmother, eyes shining. "Grandma, please." He ain't lying. The baby stopped crying the second he held her. Like magic but real. Miss Lorraine studied Alexander for a long, aching moment. Then she looked at Jamal, really looked. The hope she'd buried under years of disappointment was trying to crawl back into his face, and she couldn't stand to crush it again. She sagged a little. "I ain't never been on a private jet before. Feels like I'm dreaming, and about to wake up owing the devil." Alexander smiled, small and tired. "No debts tonight. Just a car waiting when we land and a hospital room with your name on it." She nodded once, sharp, like signing a treaty with the enemy she had decided to trust for one night only. Back in the forward cabin, Alexander's phone started blowing up again. His CFO this time, furious text. "Zurich is walking. Board emergency meeting at 8 a.m. You cannot tank an $8 billion deal over a flight attendant's sob story." Alexander stared at the screen until the words blurred. He typed one reply. "Handle it or find new jobs." Then he turned the phone face down and went to sit beside the crib, watching Amara's tiny chest rise and fall, rehearsing in his head how to explain to a 10-year-old boy that the world was about to try to rip this moment away from both of them. Resistance wasn't just coming from Miss Lorraine. It was coming from every corner of the life he used to call his own. And it was only getting started. The Maybach pulled up to the private terminal at Teterboro just after 4 a.m. A cold November wind whipped across the tarmac, carrying the smell of jet fuel and the promise of winter. Alexander stepped out first, Amara bundled against his chest in a cashmere blanket. Jamal followed, holding his grandmother's arm like she was made of spun sugar. Miss Lorraine moved slow, oxygen tank rolling behind her on a little cart the flight crew had insisted on carrying down the stairs. 2 more SUVs idled nearby. Alexander's security team. Hospital transport. Press liaison because someone had already knew. Alexander ignored them all. He opened the back door himself. "Miss Lorraine, you and Jamal ride with us." She hesitated on the bottom step, pride flaring one last time. "I ain't never been in a car this fancy. I might leave poor people dust on your seats." Alexander smiled, the first real smile in months. "I'll survive." Inside, the Maybach was quiet luxury, heated seats, soft lighting, a partition up so the driver couldn't hear. Amara's portable crib was already strapped in. A thermos of chamomile tea waited for Miss Lorraine. Swiss formula warmed to exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit waited for the baby. Jamal climbed in last and just stared. "This like a spaceship," he whispered. Alexander laughed under his breath. "Wait till you see the apartment." The drive into Manhattan took 43 minutes. 43 minutes none of them would ever get back or ever forget. Miss Lorraine fell asleep 5 minutes in, head against the window, mouth slightly open. Jamal tried to stay awake but the seats were too warm, the motion too smooth. His eyes fluttered. Alexander watched them both and felt something fierce and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Protectiveness that had nothing to do with boardrooms or balance sheets. Halfway across the bridge, Jamal's head tipped sideways and landed against Alexander's arm. The boy jerked awake instantly. Sorry, Mr. Alexander?" "It's just Alexander," he said softly. "And you're fine right there." Jamal searched his face, then let his head rest again, lighter this time. Within seconds he was out, small snores mixing with the hum of tires on asphalt. Alexander looked down at the sleeping boy and the sleeping grandmother and the sleeping baby and realized he had kidnapped an entire family in the gentlest way possible. And they had kidnapped him right back. The penthouse, 72nd and 5th, full floor, 3,200 square feet of glass and Central Park views. 6:17 a.m. Sunrise bled pink across the park as the private elevator opened directly into the foyer. Miss Lorraine took one look at the marble, the fresh orchids, the Picasso sketch by the door and stopped dead. "Lord Jesus," she breathed. "I know I'm dreamin' now." Jamal's mouth actually fell open. "We stayin' here?" "For as long as you need," Alexander said. He gave them the tour himself, carrying Amara the whole time because she refused to be put down now. Guest wing with 2 bedrooms and a sitting room. Private nurse's suite already staffed. Chef on call. The terrace where you could see clear to the Hudson on a good day. Miss Lorraine kept touching things like they might vanish. The silk drapes, the heated bathroom floors, the bowl of perfect apples on the counter. Alexander ended in the kitchen. "Hospital says they'll admit you at 10. Dr. Okonkwo herself will meet us. Until then, sleep, eat, shower, whatever you want." Miss Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "And what you want in return, Mr. Voss?" Alexander set Amara in the bouncer the staff had magically produced. He looked Miss Lorraine dead in the eye. "I want Jamal to teach me how to be the kind of man who deserves to hold his daughter without shaking. That's all the payment I need." Silence. Then Miss Lorraine reached out and patted his cheek with a hand that trembled from steroids and hope. "You already startin', baby," she said quietly. 8:42 a.m. Alexander stood in the nursery doorway watching Jamal sit cross-legged on the rug, showing Amara how to stack soft blocks. Every time she knocked them over she squealed with delight, and Jamal laughed like it was the best joke in the world. Alexander's phone buzzed again. He finally looked. 38 missed calls. 147 new emails. Subject line screaming, "Catastrophic, irresponsible, board vote scheduled." He turned the phone off completely and walked into the nursery. Jamal glanced up. "She real smart. Already knows cause and effect." Alexander lowered himself to the rug, suit and all. "Teach me." Jamal grinned, handed him a block. "You gotta let her knock it down sometimes. That's how she learns she can build it again." They built towers until Amara got bored and crawled into Alexander's lap instead. Across the hall, Miss Lorraine napped under a down comforter that cost more than her rent used to be, 4-pole already waiting for the home nurse who would start fluids at 9. The doorman called up, paparazzi at the gate. Someone had leaked the plain story. Hashtags were trending. Alexander didn't care. He looked at the 10-year-old boy currently letting his 6-month-old daughter chew on his finger and felt the last wall inside him crumble. Forced proximity wasn't the storm, the delayed flight, or the hospital schedule anymore. It was this, for people who had nothing in common except broken hearts, now breathing the same air under one roof, unable to leave each other even if they wanted to. And none of them wanted to. Not yet. The penthouse was quiet after midnight, the kind of quiet that only exists 68 floors above a sleeping city. Amara had finally gone down in her crib after a 2 a.m. bottle. Miss Lorraine was asleep in the guest wing, oxygen humming softly, the new night nurse reading psalms on an iPad outside her door. Alexander found Jamal in the library, really just a big room with too many books no one had ever read, sitting on the floor in Spider-Man pajamas the housekeeper had overnight from Target. He was staring at a framed photograph on the lowest shelf, Camille at 8 months pregnant, laughing on a sailboat in Santorini, wind in her hair, hand resting on the curve that would become Amara. Jamal didn't hear Alexander approach until the floor creaked. "She was real pretty," Jamal said without turning. "Like a Disney princess but real." Alexander sat down beside him, back against the leather sofa, knees up like they were 2 kids hiding from the world. "She hated that picture," Alexander said, voice low. "Said she looked like a beached whale." Jamal smiled a little. "My mama had one like that. Said she looked like a sweet potato with legs." Alexander's throat tightened. "Tell me about her." Jamal picked at the carpet. For a long time he didn't speak. Then. "She worked nights at the Waffle House on Moreland. Came home smelling like bacon and coffee. Used to let me stay up till she got off shift so we could eat breakfast at 4 in the morning like it was normal. She'd sing old Mary J. Blige songs while she counted tips on the kitchen table. Said one day we was gonna have a house with a yard and a dog named Money." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Drunk driver ran the red light on my 7th birthday. She was coming home early to surprise me with a Spider-Man cake. Never even made it out the ambulance." Alexander closed his eyes. The weight of it settled on both of them, familiar and unbearable. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It felt too small. Jamal shrugged, the way kids do when they've already cried all the tears they're allowed. "Grandma says God needed another angel. I think God just messy sometimes." Alexander let out a broken laugh that was half sob. They sat in silence until Jamal reached for another photo. This one, Camille holding newborn Amara in the hospital bed, both of them asleep, for lines and wires everywhere. "She died right after this picture," Alexander said, voice cracking on every word. "Placental abruption. They did emergency C-section, got Amara out, but Camille, she hemorrhaged. I was in London closing a deal. By the time the jet got back she was already gone. I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell her I was scared. Never got to hold her hand." His voice gave out completely. Jamal looked at him, eyes ancient. "That why you didn't hold the baby?" Alexander nodded, ashamed. "Every time I tried I saw Camille dying. I thought if I didn't get attached it couldn't hurt worse than it already did. Turns out that's not how love works." Jamal was quiet for a long time. Then he did something that broke Alexander clean in half. He scooted closer and laid his head, light as a bird, against Alexander's upper arm, the same way he had in the car. "My grandma says hurt is just love with nowhere left to go," he murmured. Alexander's tears fell onto the carpet, dark spots on expensive wool. He didn't wipe them away. After a minute Jamal reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper, edges soft from being carried too long. He unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, crayon and marker on the back of a church bulletin. Stick figure family, a tall lady with a big smile and apron, a little boy with a huge head and Spider-Man shirt, and an older lady with gray hair and a cane. Above them, in shaky capital letters, "My family." At the bottom, newer, added in blue marker that was still bright, a man with yellow hair holding a tiny baby. An arrow pointed to the man with the word Daddy, underlined 3 times. Alexander stared at it until the lines blurred. "Jamal?" "I know you ain't really," Jamal said quickly, cheeks flushing dark. When I draw stuff, sometimes it helps make it feel true for a minute. Grandma says wishin' don't cost nothin'." Alexander took the drawing with shaking hands like it was the original Mona Lisa. He folded it once, carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of the sweatpants he'd changed into, the pocket right over his heart. "I'm keeping this," he said, voice rough. "Forever." Jamal ducked his head, embarrassed and pleased at the same time. From the doorway, neither of them had noticed Miss Lorraine standing in her robe, oxygen tubing trailing behind her like a translucent tail. She had heard everything. She walked slowly over, lowered herself into an armchair with a small groan, and looked at her grandson. "Baby," she said gently, "come sit with me." Jamal went. She pulled him into her lap even though he was getting too big, the way she had when he was 5 and the nightmares came. "Mr. Alexander," she began, voice steady, "I got my own confessin' to do. When they told me the cancer spread to the bones I stopped fightin'. Not for me, for him." She stroked Jamal's braids. "I decided I'd rather die quick than watch him go through foster care, group homes, all of it. I been prayin' for a miracle I didn't believe in anymore." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them either. "Tonight the Lord sent me a miracle wearin' a $5,000 suit and a broken heart. And I been too proud to say thank you proper." Alexander shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," she corrected. "But I'm still scared. Scared you'll wake up tomorrow and decide this was all a dream you don't want no more." Alexander looked from her to Jamal to the baby monitor showing Amara's tiny sleeping form. "I'm terrified too," he admitted. "But I'm more terrified of waking up tomorrow and none of you being here." Miss Lorraine studied him for a long time. Then she reached out one thin hand. Alexander took it. Jamal reached out his smaller one and laid it on top of both of theirs. 3 palms. 3 heartbeats. 1 unspoken promise. Outside, Manhattan glittered like it had never seen grief. Inside the library, grief finally had nowhere left to hide. And for the first time in years, none of them were alone with it. The next 10 days moved like a secret heartbeat. Nobody wanted to wake up. Alexander canceled everything. The Zurich deal died quietly in a conference room he never entered. The board screamed, then lawyered up, then went silent when he wired each member a personal severance that made retirement look generous. He didn't care. For the first time in 15 years, money felt weightless. Mornings belonged to Amara and Jamal. They turned the long dining table into a playground of soft blankets and baby toys. Jamal discovered that if he lay on his back and held Amara above his chest, she would squeal and kick like she was flying. Alexander took 100 photos he never posted anywhere. Some mornings he lay down beside them and let Jamal fly, Amara over both of them while she drooled on their faces and laughed the laugh that stitched the world back together. Afternoons were for Miss Lorraine's treatments. Alexander went with her every single time. He learned how to hold the emesis basin without flinching, how to joke with the phlebotomist so she wouldn't cry, how to read the lab numbers on the portal before the doctor called. When the side effects hit hard, he sat by her bed and read her the psalms she loved in a voice that got steadier every day. Evenings were sacred. The chef left at 6. After that it was just the four of them. Jamal taught Alexander how to make his mama's broke people macaroni, elbow noodles, government cheese, a can of Rotel, and love. They burned the first batch. The second batch was perfect. Miss Lorraine ate 2 bowls and declared it tasted like home. One night the fever from the new meds left her shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Jamal crawled into the hospital bed with her like he was 5 again. Alexander pulled the armchair close and held her hand across the rail until dawn. When the chills finally broke, she looked at him with clear eyes and whispered, "You still here?" "I'm still here," he answered. Another night, Amara woke screaming from teething pain. Alexander rocked her for an hour with no luck. Jamal patted in, hair wild, took the baby without a word and walked her to the kitchen. He warmed a washcloth under hot water, folded it around a spoon to make a cold compress, and pressed it gently to her gums while humming that same cracked lullaby from the plane. Within minutes Amara was asleep on his narrow chest. Alexander stood in the doorway watching, tears sliding unchecked. Jamal looked up. "You can take her now." Alexander shook his head. "She's exactly where she needs to be." He sat on the floor beside the rocking chair and rested his head against Jamal's knee. Jamal's free hand came down and settled lightly on Alexander's hair, fingers moving in slow, soothing circles the way his mama used to do for him. Neither of them spoke. They just breathed together until the city outside the windows turned lavender with coming morning. On the 8th night, Miss Lorraine felt strong enough for the terrace. They wrapped her in blankets and carried out the portable oxygen. Central Park was bare and beautiful under December stars. Jamal pointed out constellations he'd learned from library books. Alexander admitted he didn't know a single one. Jamal drew them in the air with his finger until Alexander could see them too. Orion the hunter, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia on her throne. Miss Lorraine watched them with shining eyes and said, voice soft, "Look at God weaving a family out of spare parts." Alexander's throat closed. He couldn't answer. Later, when she was asleep and Amara was down, Alexander found Jamal in the library again, this time holding a children's book about adoption he'd found on the shelf. "You ever gonna leave?" Jamal asked without looking up. Alexander sat on the rug. "Do you want me to?" Jamal shook his head fast then slow. "I want you to stay. But grown-ups always got reasons." Alexander took the book gently from his hands and set it aside. "I lost one family because I was chasing the wrong things," he said. "I'm not losing another one. Not ever again." Jamal studied him for a long moment, eyes searching for the lie and not finding it. Then he launched himself across the rug and wrapped his arms around Alexander's neck so hard it hurt. Alexander held him back just as tight, feeling the small body shake with silent sobs that had been held in for years. "I got you," Alexander whispered into the boy's braids. "I got you, son." The words slipped out before he could stop it. Jamal went very still. Alexander's heart stopped. Then Jamal pulled back just far enough to look at him, eyes red, nose running, and whispered, "Can I call you that? Just, sometimes?" Alexander cupped the boy's wet face in both hands. "Every day for the rest of your life if you want." Jamal smiled through the tears, big and bright and disbelieving. From the doorway, Miss Lorraine watched with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming. The oxygen hissed softly, steady and strong. In the nursery, Amara sighed in her sleep and kicked one foot free of the blanket. Outside, snow began to fall, fat, silent flakes drifting over Central Park like forgiveness made visible. Inside, for people who had started as strangers on a plane learned the sound of the same heartbeat. And for one perfect week, nothing and no one could touch them. It felt like healing. It felt like home. It felt like love at last. But perfect weeks end. And some storms don't knock. They simply arrive. It began with a phone call Alexander never should have answered. Day 11. Miss Lorraine's latest scans were so good the doctors used the word remission, like they were afraid it might vanish if spoken too loudly. Alexander had just hung up from Rachel Okonkwo when the unknown number rang through on the private line. He almost let it go to voicemail. "You didn't? Alexander Voss?" A woman's voice, crisp, expensive, familiar in the way a nightmare is familiar. "Speaking." This is Margaret Halstead, New York City Administration for Children's Services. We need to speak about Jamal Carter. Today. The world narrowed to a single point of ice. Margaret Halstead arrived at 4:17 p.m. flanked by 2 caseworkers and a police officer who waited in the lobby, just in case. Alexander met them in the formal living room he had never once used. Jamal was in the kitchen helping the nurse puree sweet potatoes for Amara. Miss Lorraine was napping. Alexander had exactly 4 minutes of warning. Margaret wasted none of them. We've received a credible report that you are harboring a minor without legal authority. Jamal Carter is a ward of the state of Georgia. His grandmother's temporary custody was revoked 6 weeks ago when she became too ill to care for him. A foster placement was already approved. You have no standing, Mr. Voss. None. Alexander felt the floor tilt. There's been a misunderstanding. No, she cut in, sliding a thick folder across the coffee table. This is kidnapping across state lines. The fact that you're wealthy doesn't make it legal, it makes it federal. Inside the folder, court orders, medical records, a social worker's report dated 3 days before the flight stating Miss Lorraine Carter was no longer capable of providing a safe environment. A judge's signature transferring Jamal to emergency foster care pending permanent placement. Alexander's ears roared. Margaret's voice turned almost gentle, which was worse. I understand you've formed an attachment. That happens sometimes with trauma bonding. But Jamal needs stability, therapy, and a family vetted by the state. Not a billionaire with untreated grief buying his redemption. The word buying hit like a fist. From the hallway came the small sound of bare feet on marble. Jamal stood frozen, bowl of orange puree in both hands, eyes huge. Mr. Alexander? His voice cracked on the second syllable. They talking me? Alexander moved before thought, placing himself between the boy and the caseworkers. No one is taking you anywhere. Margaret sighed. Mr. Voss, step aside or I will have you arrested. Jamal's gaze darted to the folder, to the badge on the officer downstairs, to Alexander's face. Something inside him folded in on itself. You knew, he whispered. You knew and you didn't tell me. I just found out 30 seconds before you did, Alexander said desperately. I swear on my daughter's life. But Jamal was already backing away, bowls slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble. Orange splattered like blood. You said forever. His voice broke into shards. You said son. Miss Lorraine appeared in her robe, oxygen hissing, face ashen. What in God's name? Margaret turned to her with practiced compassion. Mrs. Carter, you are in no condition to care for a child. You knew this. We're here to do what's best for Jamal. Miss Lorraine looked at her grandson, trembling so hard the oxygen tubing shook. Best? She rasped. That boy's been through hell and back. This man gave him hope. False hope, Margaret corrected. And now he'll have to grieve it. That's on you. Both of you. Jamal's eyes filled so fast the tears spilled over without warning. He looked at Alexander one last time, betrayal, terror, love, all tangled together, then bolted. Alexander lunged after him. Jamal. The boy made it to the terrace doors, flung them open, and stood in the freezing air, nowhere left to run 68 floors up. Alexander reached him in 3 strides and dropped to his knees, grabbing Jamal's shoulders. Look at me. Look at me. I will fix this. I will hire every lawyer in the country. Jamal shoved him hard in the chest. You can't fix everything with money. You taught me that. The words gutted him. Behind them, Margaret spoke into her phone. We need an emergency removal order signed within the hour. Jamal's voice dropped to something ancient and exhausted. I should have never got in that car. Should have never let myself believe. He was crying so hard he could barely breathe. Alexander pulled him in, crushing him against his chest. Jamal fought for 3 seconds, fists pounding weakly, then went limp, sobbing into Alexander's shirt like the night his mama died. Miss Lorraine sank into a terrace chair, hand pressed to her heart, whispering Jesus over and over. Inside, Amara began to wail from her crib, sensing the fracture from 2 rooms away. Margaret stepped forward. Time's up, Mr. Voss. Alexander didn't let go. He looked up at her with eyes that had nothing left to lose. If you take him tonight, he said, voice deadly quiet, I will burn every penny I have tearing this system down until there's nothing left but ash and his name on the new one we build. I swear on my dead wife's grave. Margaret met his gaze, unflinching. Then tomorrow morning, she said, you'd better bring the best attorneys in the world to family court. Because right now, you are a danger to that child's emotional well-being. She turned to the caseworkers. We'll return at 9 a.m. with the police if necessary. The door shut behind them with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Jamal pulled away, wiping his face on his sleeve, trying to be brave and failing. "I hate you," he whispered. Then louder, "I hate you." He ran past Miss Lorraine, past the shattered bowl, past Amara's cries, into the guest room and slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Alexander stayed on his knees in the cold, snow starting to dust his hair, staring at the city that suddenly felt like an enemy. Miss Lorraine's voice floated out, broken. "What have we done to that child?" Alexander had no answer. Inside the penthouse, 3 doors stayed closed. One baby screamed herself to sleep. One boy curled into a ball and silently begged the world to take it all back. One man sat on a freezing terrace until dawn, holding the crayon drawing that now felt like the only real thing he'd ever owned. Everything they had built in 11 days shattered in 11 minutes. And the worst part? They all believed, for one merciless night, that love had been the mistake. 5:03 a.m. The penthouse was colder than the terrace. Alexander had not moved from the marble floor outside Jamal's door all night. Back against the wall, knees drawn up, the crayon drawing clutched in his fist so tightly the paper had started to tear at the folds. He had listened to Jamal cry until the crying stopped around 3 a.m. Then came the silence that is worse than crying. Inside the guest room, Jamal lay on his stomach, face buried in the pillow that still smelled like the fancy detergent Alexander used. He was not asleep. He was counting heartbeats, waiting for footsteps that would mean they were coming to take him. Every time the elevator dinged in the shaft he flinched. Across the hall, Miss Lorraine sat in the dark with her Bible open on her lap, but she had not turned a page in hours. The oxygen hissed like an accusation. In the nursery, Amara slept fitfully, tiny fists opening and closing on nothing. For people breathing the same air miles apart. 5:47 a.m. Alexander finally stood. His legs had gone numb hours ago, pins and needles stabbed all the way to his hips. He didn't care. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and stared at it for a long time. Then he carried it to Jamal's door and knocked once, soft. No answer. He opened the door anyway. Moonlight from the park fell across the bed. Jamal's small shape was curled into the tightest ball a body can make. Alexander set the water on the nightstand and sat on the very edge of the mattress. For a full minute neither moved. Then Jamal's voice came muffled and raw. "Go away." "I can't," Alexander said. Jamal rolled over. His eyes were swollen, almost shut. "You promised forever and it lasted 11 days. That's worse than never." Alexander felt the words like knives, but he didn't flinch. "You're right. I broke the only promise that ever mattered to you. And I will carry that for the rest of my life." Jamal stared at the ceiling. "They're gonna put me with strangers. Some of them are okay. Some of them aren't." Alexander's voice cracked. "I know. How could you know? You never been little and powerless." Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it he took a photograph he had never shown anyone. 8-year-old Alexander in a too-big blazer, standing alone in front of a gray stone mansion. Eyes hollow. Bruises on his wrists you could only see if you knew where to look. "My parents died in a plane crash when I was 7, he said quietly. "My uncle took me in for the trust fund. He locked me in closets when I cried. Hired nannies who looked the other way. I learned real early that money doesn't keep you safe. It just makes the cage prettier." Jamal turned his head. Really looked at the picture. Then at Alexander. "I swore," Alexander continued, "the day I turned 18 and got control of the estate, that no child would ever feel that kind of alone if I could stop it. And then I met you and I became exactly what I hated. Someone who made a little boy hope and then let the world rip it away." Jamal's lip trembled. "So what now? You gonna buy a judge?" Alexander shook his head. "I'm going to do the one thing money can't buy." He stood up, walked to the door and opened it wide. Then he got down on both knees in the hallway, right there on the cold marble where anyone walking past could see. "I'm not your father by law," he called out, loud enough for the whole apartment to hear. "I have no right to keep you. But I am begging you, Jamal Carter, let me earn the right to try. Not with everything I am and everything I have, for as long as you'll let me." Silence. Then small footsteps. Jamal appeared in the doorway, barefoot, blanket around his shoulders like a cape. He looked down at the man on his knees. "You'd really do that? Get on your knees for me?" "I'd crawl through fire for you," Alexander said without hesitation. Jamal's face crumpled. He took one step. Then another. Then he ran the last 3 steps and crashed into Alexander's chest, arms around his neck so tight it hurt to breathe. Alexander held him like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. Miss Lorraine appeared behind them, tears streaming. She laid a hand on both their heads. "Get up, both of you," she whispered. "We got a war tomorrow and we fight it together." 7:12 a.m. Alexander showered, shaved, put on the darkest suit he owned. He looked like he was going to a funeral. In a way he was the funeral of the man who thought money could fix anything. He called the 3 best family law attorneys in New York. All of them told him the same thing: the case was airtight. George's order was valid. Emergency custody would almost certainly be granted to ACS at 9 a.m. He thanked them, hung up and called someone else. Rachel Okonkwo picked up on the first ring. "I need a favor that could cost you your license," he said. "Name it." "I need Miss Lorraine Carter declared medically stable enough for kinship custody, retroactive. And I need it on a judge's desk by 8:30. Rachel exhaled. "You're asking me to commit fraud." "I'm asking you to tell the truth a few weeks early." Her last scan was clean. "You and I both know she's responding better than anyone predicted." Silence. Then, "Give me 20 minutes. 8:02 a.m. Alexander walked into Jamal's room carrying a small box. Inside was a simple gold chain with a single charm, a tiny airplane. "I had this made yesterday," he said, "before everything went to hell. I was going to give it to you when the adoption papers came through." Jamal stared at it. Alexander fastened it around the boy's neck. "I don't know what the judge will say today. But this plane is yours no matter what. Because you flew into my life and changed everything. And I'm never taking that back." Jamal touched the charm with careful fingers. 8:47 a.m. The elevator dinged. Margaret Halstead stepped out alone this time. No police. No case workers. Just a new folder in her hand. She looked at Alexander, at Miss Lorraine in a Sunday dress holding Jamal's hand, at the airplane necklace glinting at his throat. She looked tired. "New evidence was submitted overnight," she said. "Mrs. Carter's oncologist swears under penalty of perjury that she is stable, responding to treatment and capable of caring for Jamal with appropriate support services, which Mr. Voss has agreed to fund indefinitely through a private trust." She handed Alexander the folder. "Emergency hearing rescheduled. Kinship custody reinstated pending full review in 90 days. Margaret met his eyes. "Don't make me regret this." Alexander could only nod. When the elevator doors closed, Jamal looked up at him, eyes wide. "So, I get to stay?" Alexander dropped to his knees again, this time in victory. "You get to stay." Jamal launched himself into his arms. Miss Lorraine raised her hands to heaven and shouted a hallelujah that rattled the windows. And somewhere in the nursery, Amara woke up laughing for no reason at all, as if she already knew. The choice had been made. Not by money. By a man willing to lose everything to keep a promise. By a grandmother who chose hope over pride. By a little boy who decided one more time to believe. 18 months later. Late August, golden hour over Central Park. The terrace doors were thrown wide open. Music, old-school Mary J. Blige, spilled out across the rooftop garden Alexander had built where cold concrete used to be. Real grass, real trees, a tiny playground slide painted Spider-Man red and blue. Jamal, now 11, taller, voice starting to crack, stood at the grill in a kiss the cook apron that hung to his knees, flipping turkey burgers with the solemn concentration of someone who had been trusted with fire. "Dad. You said medium, right?" he yelled over his shoulder. Alexander's sleeves rolled high, Amara on his hip like she had always belonged there, walked over and inspected the patties. "Those are perfect, Chef Carter," he declared. "You're officially promoted to Saturday Grill Master." Jamal's grin could have powered the whole island. Inside, Miss Lorraine, hair growing back thick and silver, oxygen tank long retired, was arranging a mountain of macaroni salad and her famous peach cobbler on the long farmhouse table Alexander had custom-built so everyone could sit together without feeling like they were at a board meeting. There were 32 people coming tonight. Neighbors from the building who had become aunties. Nurses from the hospital who still checked in. Dr. Rachel Okonkwo, who had indeed risked her license and never once regretted it. The social worker, Margaret Halstead, who had quietly attended every court date to testify that this was the safest, most loving home she had ever placed a child in. And at the center of it all, a brand new framed photograph on the mantel, the 4 of them on adoption day last month. Jamal Alexander Voss Carter, legally and forever. Miss Lorraine Carter, grandmother and co-guardian. Alexander Voss, father, no hyphen, no question mark. Amara Camille Voss Carter, little sister, 18 months old, curls for days, already bossing everyone. The judge had cried when she signed the order. So had half the courtroom. Now Jamal set the last burger on the platter and wiped his hands on the apron. Dad, can I do it now? Alexander's eyes softened. Yeah, son. Go ahead. Jamal disappeared inside, came back with a small velvet box he had guarded like state secrets for 2 weeks. The music lowered. Everyone drifted out to the terrace as if they had rehearsed it. Alexander handed Amara to Miss Lorraine and turned to face Jamal. The boy took a shaky breath. 18 months ago, he started, voice carrying over the quiet crowd, I got on a plane with one person left in the world who loved me. I was scared and mad and didn't know how to keep hoping. Then this rich white dude's baby wouldn't stop crying and I thought, man, somebody gotta help that little girl. Soft laughter rippled. I didn't know I was helping myself. I didn't know that sometimes God answers prayers with a screaming baby and a man who don't know how to hold her yet. Alexander's eyes were already shining. Jamal opened the box. Inside was a thick, brushed gold band. Simple. Engraved on the inside, 30,000 feet, forever ground. I asked Grandma what I could give you that money didn't already buy, Jamal continued, voice cracking. She said the only thing left is my whole heart, every day for the rest of my life. So this is me saying thank you for choosing us when you didn't have to. For being my dad when the paper said you weren't. For teaching me family ain't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up and never leaves. He got down on one knee, 11 years old, backwards baseball cap, tears streaming, and held up the ring. Alexander Voss, will you be my dad, for real, for always, no takebacks? The terrace went completely silent except for Amara's happy squeal and the distant hum of the city. Alexander dropped to both knees so hard the wood thudded, cupped Jamal's wet face in both hands and rested their foreheads together. I have been your dad since the second you put my daughter in my arms and called me on my cowardice, he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. But yes, son. 1,000 times yes. He let Jamal slide the ring onto his finger. Then he pulled a second, smaller box from his pocket and opened it. A matching gold band, child-sized, engraved with the same words. Your turn, Alexander said, voice breaking wide open. Jamal held out his left hand without hesitation. Alexander slipped the ring on, kissed his son's knuckles like he was knighting him, and then they were hugging so hard they almost toppled over. The terrace erupted. Cheers, applause, grown men crying into napkins. Miss Lorraine handed Amara to Rachel and walked over with something behind her back. One more thing, she announced, pulling out a rolled document tied with red ribbon. She unfurled it. Official name change paperwork, already approved. From this day forward, the penthouse, the trust, the family foundation, every legal document would read. The Voss Carter family. Alexander stared, then pulled her into the hug too. The three of them stood wrapped together while Amara toddled over and latched onto all their legs, demanding in. Later, when the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky turned the color of peach cobbler, they cut the cake, chocolate with Spider-Man on top, because some things never change. Jamal stood on a chair so everyone could hear. Hey, quick question for y'all. He grinned at the crowd. If a broke kid from Atlanta and a billionaire with a crying baby can end up family, what could happen in your life if you just helped somebody who needed it? He paused, letting it sink in. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Maybe your 30,000 feet moment is closer than you think. Cameras flashed. Someone started clapping slow. It built until the whole terrace was thundering. Alexander lifted his glass, sparkling cider for the kids, champagne for the grown. To the night a baby wouldn't stop crying, he said, voice steady and strong, and a little boy decided the world was still worth saving. Jamal raised his plastic cup. To unexpected love. Miss Lorraine added, soft but sure, and to love at last. Amara, sticky with frosting, banged her sippy cup on the table and yelled her new favorite word at the top of her lungs. Dada. Everyone laughed until they cried. The music came back up. The city glittered below them, no longer an enemy. High above the park, 4 people who had once been strangers on a plane danced barefoot in real grass under real stars, rings catching the light every time they moved. And if you had been there, quiet in the corner, you would have heard Jamal lean over and whisper to his father the same words he first spoke 30,000 feet above an ocean. She just wanted her daddy to hold her the right way. Alexander looked at his son, at his daughter on his hip, at his mother-in-law spinning slow with Dr. Rachel, and answered the only way he could. I finally learned how. And somewhere Camille smiled. Now, beautiful people watching this video, tell me in the comments, when was your 30,000 feet moment? When did a stranger, a baby, a broken night turn into the start of your real family? I'm reading every single one tonight with my kids. Don't hold back. Love is listening.